Welcome to another session of the Agile Insights. Today, I am accompanied by Christian Meyer to Natrup, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Just to inform everyone about the working agreements that we have in place, regular participants cannot unmute themselves just to make sure we don't get interrupted in the conversation by any mistake. If you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. As the moderator of this session, as the interviewer, I will try to involve those questions into the interview with Christian. And as usual, this interview is being recorded and it will be available to all of you within, I think, the next 4 or 5 days. Depends on how much or how fast we can make the post-production of this. Now, let's dive into the conversation itself. Christian, it's a pleasure to host you. Your team colleague, actually, Sarah, had reached out to us a few months ago. And when she emailed me and I saw your profile doing all the work that you've been doing, and you can talk about this in a few moments yourself, I was like, this is going to be a very interesting interview partner. So I've been looking forward to this moment for a long time. We had our introduction call last week, and I'm sure this will be a wonderful conversation.
Oh, thank you very much for having us and having me. And it's a great honor to talk, and really looking forward to a good, productive and interesting conversation.
Yeah. So to everyone that's joining or that is watching this video at a later point in time, Christian has spent most of his professional life, let's call it this way, working in the not-for-profit sector. And you can correct me around this.
That's correct.
So
yeah.
Before I dive into specific questions about this area, I would love to learn a bit more about you, Christian, or have you share a bit more of your experience with our audience. So can you tell me a bit about yourself and what have you done? Where have you worked on in the past decade plus?
Oh, that makes me sound incredibly old and sounds incredibly sad. But yeah, I'm a rapidly aging middle-aged man. I don't think my CV is particularly interesting. After a good number of years at large management consultancies, I was simply sick of making rich people richer. But I've also admired the technical competencies of many of these and how we manage the organizations driven for a profit motive. So my attempt here since 2010 or so, when I made the switch, is to simply bring a degree of professionalism and a humble humility to the not-for-profit sector, whose job is not obviously to amass profit, but whose job is to address social needs. And turns out that is not only a lot more purpose-filling, but also a lot more fun.
Yeah. So can you give me like an overview of projects that you've worked on in the not-for-profit sector, and maybe also focus specifically on those projects where you have applied, I mean, this is the Agile Insights,
right?
Agile's principles in your work, sometimes consciously, sometimes maybe even unconsciously.
So that's a really good question. The probably unconsciously or retrospective realization that we've done this was in my humanitarian, or is in my humanitarian work. So just to take a real example, in 2010, you may remember, massive earthquake in Haiti. A lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of destruction in a already poverty-stricken and disadvantaged place. And you can imagine, Sohrab, the earthquake just devastated societies and families there. I was a first responder with the Red Cross, and were briefed on typical project methodology. This is when you land in Leogan. This is what you will do in the first 6 hours. This is when you proceed to camp. This is when, and it was a pretty sort of a assuring plan to put in action. And rest assured, none of that survived even the first 5 minutes of arrival. It didn't even survive the first hour before arrival, because you arrive and say, okay, first of all, we can't get to Leogan, the epicenter. And what ensued was a totally flexed mission plan over the remaining month of my time in Haiti, where we did search and rescue, rebuilding basic infrastructures, water sanitation, water provision, water sources from which we thought we can get dirt water and clean them up and build up a water site, which is a major project. That didn't work because more rainfall made this whole thing slippery. So we had to change plan again, but we couldn't delay the water provision because we committed to other agencies like the United Nations that we would deliver X many thousands liters of purified water by that time. But, we need to go and change logistics and everything completely. The remarkable thing is we've done all that. And there wasn't a single call back to head office. It was all a small team of 6 to 8 people in Leogan on mobile phones, between car breakages and changing sleeping patterns. So 10 years on, I learned about Agile, and I found my best Agile work was actually done when I didn't even know about Agile. So that was probably the most Agile thing, or one of the most Agile thing I do. And the same in Pakistan, the same during South Sudan famine, the same during building of a refugee camp in Jordan. The plan you take off in Germany at the airport with is gone and outdated by the time you land.
So, and this reminds me of this quote from Jeff Bezos: "No spreadsheet survives the first contact with the customer."
Right.
When you have your business plan about, okay, we're going to build this business and it's going to be so great, and then you get your first customers and you're like, oh man, we have to change a ton of things. Now, what I would want to dive deep into a bit is, you mentioned there was this plan before you landed in Haiti, right? Yeah. And my assumption is, again, correct me if I'm wrong, that this plan was not created necessarily by you or the project team that was going to be on site, that it was somehow centrally developed. But when you arrived in Haiti, you immediately realized massive adaptations, pivots in startup talk are needed, and you had the authority to make those changes, right? Without calling back to the headquarters. Is my understanding correct?
Yeah, I mean, look, well, there's a Dutch saying which I love. Some things are just easier to apologize afterwards than to ask permission in advance.
Yeah.
So a lot of the things we just needed to do. I think what picturizes this one is we didn't flex, we didn't pivot on the aims. We still delivered that water to the local population or to other NGO for distributions. We still did those search and rescue missions. We even extended it. So we've actually, if you look at the outcome, we did more. We did exactly what we promised. We just did it in a totally different location, in a totally different area, in a totally different way with different staff.
Yeah.
No contact, like Mr. Bezos said, that he's not a particular Agile worker here, but no contact survives plan with the reality. That is the other thing that has to be said. So there's a plan that doesn't survive contact with the first customer, and then there is the contact that plans where, hang on, I still need to do all this. So I think it's really important, and I say this to not just my humanitarian work, but also in our other work, when we work with organizations and the private sector these days, where we say, we've got to be very fixed in what we want to achieve and what needs to be done, and then be completely flexible in how we do it.
Be very clear on the mission in your case, right?
Yeah.
But then be flexible in how you approach it, right? How it is technically realized.
Yeah. So there's a great organization to just maybe put another experience here on there. In 2016, I traveled to rural southern Nigeria for a consortia of local and international UN and NGOs. Now, the UN organizations and the NGOs, to a certain degree, they are bureaucracies. They go there with multi-year plans and terms of reference and log frames, and there's this whole management philosophy around how do we develop things. And this was all about an agricultural project. Imagine a multi-million initiative to curb migration and to strengthen agriculture in an area that is massively affected by climate change. So I got in a pretty basic car and driven out to a very rural village, the kind of village that takes you 3 days to get to, where the next tarmac road is like 150 kilometers away. And because I just wanted to see it, I got out. And within 5 minutes, a very kind elderly gentleman who spoke English, which is not the rural language there, the local language, got out an old wall calendar from 1980. You remember these wall calendars that you put on the wall there? Some of our older viewers might remember them. And said, look, I don't know who you are. Welcome. Can you help me rename the month? And I said, well, what do you mean? And so he put this thing on the hood of the car and said, our month in our local language are named according to the activities we need to do on the field. So harvest, digging, seeding, watering, and then another harvest season. And none of that works anymore. And I need to teach my family and my juniors, how that we now have different harvest seasons because the climate change affects our harvesting seasons massively. And the rains now come 4 weeks later, and that drives everything here in this Niger Delta, in Calabar it's called. And it's that here I am with a multi-million, log frame behind me with the United Nations, international INGOs, agricultural enhancement project that this 70-plus-year-old man has just completely shot to pieces, saying, well, none of that works. None of these academics were right. If the month need to be renamed, we're out in the water. So amazingly, what they've done is they've realized that this local expert, I would call him this gentleman, was more right and more accurate than all the international agricultural experts sitting at universities around the north, and said, look, we don't know what's going to happen now. We have this money. We have the project committed. Instead of doing this one project along the project plan that we've developed together for the last year, set up 20 projects and we'll see what works. And we expect a 99% failure rate, but we're hoping for one breakthrough in harvest yields, which we can measure. What was amazing about this is they got a lot better than that. They got a lot more breakthroughs. They looked very different, even in villages that were, at the face of it, very similar. They weren't. Local context matters to a massive degree, even a few kilometers apart. And what was fantastic about this was that they had the, foresight to say, let's abandon plans, let's change, let's pivot, as you would put it. Mm-hmm. Let's go for a portfolio approach. So we try a lot of things, and we're hoping that one or two of them works. That's a sort of venture capitalist approach, isn't it?
Exactly.
But also we have clear metrics. Our outcome metrics in this case is yields. You can measure the amount of rice. There is very little quantitative measuring on this. You just need to measure how many tons of rice did you get out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because that's also what ultimately helps those communities. Either they sell that and make money so they can buy other things, or they consume it themselves, which helps them not to starve. So
right. And then from that
ultimate metric.
So what I loved about this, which happened on the fly, I didn't have any cell phone coverage for 5 days. So I sort of went back and apologized in arrears again, afterwards. It seems to be a theme. And said, look, this doesn't work. And they said, fine, let's just change it. As long as we do it by metrics and by local leadership, and as long as we are observing rather than leading. And I think therein lies a lot of good agile practice, that we need to be a bit more humble, accept the fact that we can't foresee the future, accept the fact that our plans rarely ever survive first contact with reality, and then not despair, but say, fine, but what we can do is observe and learn and pivot where needed.
Yeah. So what I take away from this, both your experience in Haiti and the one in Sudan, is one thing that you already mentioned yourself, right? Having clarity on what you want to achieve and how you're going to measure that achievement, right? Be it either the amount, like the liters of clean water that are delivered, or the amount of rice in measured in tons, right, that is delivered. That's one. The other thing is accept that how you want to achieve that goal might not be the right way as you have initially thought about it, right? So be willing to change and adapt your initial project plan in those cases. And third, like, give autonomy to those people that are actually there. You mentioned this piece of like, have the local leaders like be part of this, that because they have the experience, they are close to the problem, they probably can also assess what type of approaches are working better and which ones are working worse. So those three things, right? That were some of the key drivers of success in your cases. Does that summarize it well?
Yeah, it does. It does. And it takes, again, this departure of what I would call this arrogant, charismatic leader problem.
Yes.
The world, unfortunately, gets a lot messier, a lot more unstable, a lot more demanding, and a lot more fragmented as we head into the 21st century. And climate change, and it's just one of the change aspects. And I think we need a different kind of leader out there who says, I know what I want, I know what we measure, what we define success as, and I will do everything I can to build an organization, not to succeed at how I think it should be done, but to host a platform of projects where I frankly maximize the chances of 1 or 2 successes.
Yeah.
And
based on what I want to achieve, right? Not how I want to achieve it.
Yes, based on what I want to achieve, not on my plan of how to achieve it.
Exactly.
You know,
exactly.
I want to win the war. I don't really care about the individual battle, to use a military slang. And I think, and I think that is, we need to have a conversation about how we deal with failures. You know, that they're actually incredibly good. After all, every win is a failed opportunity to learn. When we phrase that failure and take also, you know, executive incentive away from, you know, how much profit did you make, how much, you know, food did you deliver, how much water did you clarify, how much projects did you acquire, but say, look, you know, how much did you learn, how much did you inform our optimization process? I think if we change leadership to that, we'd be an awful lot better off, not just as, you know, as a society, not just as citizens in this world, not just as parents, you know, but as business leaders as well. And saying, you know, we will make more, we will drive this business faster and better and less painful if we are allowing for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive into that aspect, right? How can we transfer these lessons into regular organizations or for-profit organizations a bit later?
Yeah.
Before we go there, you mentioned a topic which I find particularly interesting, which is the topic of failure, right? Allowing people to fail, allowing people to make mistakes, and by that learn. You also mentioned that in both cases, right? I'm taking the 2 examples that you shared with us today, Haiti and Sudan, where you didn't ask for permission. You probably asked for forgiveness later, if necessary, right?
I'm not sure I always got it, though.
Yeah. But fortunately, based on my understanding, in both cases, your team and yourself were able to deliver on the results that they wanted to see. Yeah. Now, did in either of those situations, or maybe a third project, the changes that you made to the initial project plan not immediately result in successes? And what kind of conversations, if at all, did you have to have with the project leaders or with the people like giving the funding to you and your team? Like, did those conversations happen? And if yes, like, how did they happen? What was the dynamic in those conversations?
Yeah, sure. At the time, I didn't do it. I do it now with the sort of retrospective when I start working with organizations who want to, you know, be a force for good in the world, basically, not just drive profit. And I would always say, look, this is whatever you want to do, an ambitious, charismatic, and, you know, anything that is worth doing is going to be challenging, right? Can we agree on that?
Yeah,
you know, business as usual is not going to get us there, and I'm frankly have no interest in working with that. So if it's challenging, it has to change us. Nothing that doesn't change us challenges us, and everything that challenges us will change us as an organization, as an individual. You know, one of the most challenging things that I ever did was become a father, and my God, that's changing me on an almost daily basis.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
right. I think we all parents really can. You know, it's nobody would go, have kids and draw up a 20-year project plan and then deliver it. I mean, they would just turn out to be a horrible mess, these poor kids, that will not work. But back on the business side is, if we accept that if we are having the conviction, the energy, the drive, and frankly, the courage to do something challenging, then we also have to have the wisdom to let this change us. And I usually, to answer your question, usually preempt that in my conversations with the board, with the directors, and say, I'm a consultant. I drive a team of consultants around the world in sustainability, humanitarian, and development, and we don't actually always know. In fact, most of the time we have no idea. It sounds pretty weird to say, but what we're good at is learning. We are good at metric setting. We are good at observing. We are good at letting this process change us. And once you've had this conversation at the very beginning of a project, it's usually a lot easier to then pick up a call 6 months later, 3 months later, saying, hey, remember that conversation we've had? Yeah, it's changing. It's happening.
Yeah, the change is coming.
Yeah,
we aim for the change, right? So
yeah, we just found it. What gets me very worrying, I'm not sure if you have that as well, but it's like when everything just goes too smoothly.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, this is either too easy, in which case we're not fulfilling our purpose, or we're doing it completely wrong, or a lot of people are lying to us. There's only 3 opportunities here.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I have the same perspective. So if something is too easy, I always think maybe we were not aiming high enough. That could be like one of those things, or we are not seeing where we're going down the wrong path.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe we're measuring the wrong metric, right? Or maybe we're only looking at short-term gains and not at what could be in the long run, right?
Right.
Maybe we're not seeing what competitors or whoever is doing. So whenever I get the sense of things being too easy, I get suspicious.
Yes.
And
deeply.
Usually when you then drill deeper, you realize, that's the area where what we were missing out on. And this is how we can challenge ourselves, or we completely set a new baseline for ourselves. And that's then also, I mean, that's when I personally, and I know people are different, but that's when I personally get the satisfaction of having achieved something, right? When it was challenging, when it was hard, and not when it was just easy. It's like winning a game of football against my son who is 7 years old, right? That's not something that I'm particularly proud of. But when he's 15, 16, 17, and I'm 10 years older than I'm right now, and I can still beat him, then I'll be proud about that.
I'm not sure anybody ever wants to win a football game against their own children, but yeah, I see what you mean. Absolutely. No, I agree. And that requires 2 conversations. It requires this frankness about, what this is challenging, so it will change us. So this project plan and what we are as an organization will change. Yeah. Number one. And secondly, we need to realize that if we are not learning, we're doing something terribly wrong here. So there will be some projects which fail, or some parts of it which fail horribly. Obviously, you want to put some safety nets underneath it so it doesn't hurt the DNA of your organization. But you need to be mature enough and safe enough and financially equipped enough and robust enough to say, okay, well, this didn't work, and this project team will be disbanded, and here are the learnings from that, to really ingrain these. And then these 2 conversations between, we will monitor the change and we will expect failure. We want failure. We want to continuously improve the failure, is really essential. If you have a mechanism to incorporate your learnings very fast, I'm talking 15, 30 days, anything longer is just a waste of time, very fast into your ongoing projects, into your other projects that continue.
Yeah. I mean, there's this pace of not only running experiments, failing at some of them, because otherwise they wouldn't be experiments, to be very frank, right? Yeah. And then incorporating that learning in your ongoing plans and how you do things, right? When you talk about the pace of 15 to 30 days, that's an extremely high pace for most organizations. Now, being in a situation like Haiti or Sudan, where you're dealing with something that is very urgent, especially after an earthquake, I can understand that. How do like regular organizations react on that when you talk to them about this?
So let's make this more pragmatic. So I really appreciate the conversation here, but let's make this more pragmatic with an example here. Is where leaders acknowledge that they don't always need to know. So this year, 2021, started to work with a private equity house bank in Switzerland, and they realized as a management board, they don't just want to avoid doing harm, but they want to be part of the solution. They want to be a good corporate citizenship, and they want to fund, in this case, breakthrough climate solutions, and they want to tackle social cohesion, in which case they are dedicating themselves to the divide between the rich and the lesser rich people, which causes a degrading effect on democracies. And banks and financial institutions have a role to play here. But they just had no idea how to do this. I mean, they're bankers. The whole culture of this organization is around risk mitigation and compliance, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what we've done for the last 200 years in that case. And so they've called me in, my colleagues actually, and we got involved in the background, and we spent 30 days looking around, and we basically had to present saying, look, we don't know either. This is a pretty big problem outside of your comfort zone, and you have zero organizational systems, staff, talent, or experience with it. But what we can do is set up some targets and some metrics, and work with our civil society partners and observe for a year. No, let's not even do the plan. Let's just observe what happens. No leadership required. Let's figure this out together and closely watch. And what is happening now, we are talking towards the end of the year, is that out of 8 or 9 initiatives that formed, not in leadership, not with a plan, but with the civil society partners, with the junior level staff at this bank, is a pretty interesting consensus that 3 or 4 types of programs have a significant impact, not just on local social cohesion and on actually how we provide funding to climate solutions. These are the 2 targets, but an incredible business effect. People started seeing the bank as, I want a bank there because I want to give them because they earn a return on my money, but they actually care about my grandchildren's work. And one thing we didn't expect at all was that the investment manager said, because we are looking at our investment targets far more closely, not just from a financial due diligence and controlling point, but from a, does this make a difference? Our investment decisions are a lot better. And you know what, that's intuitively right. If you get to know the investment target better, the portfolio company, I guess you select them better, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, but we didn't know that in January this year. And now we are here on the 7th of December. We find that is probably the single largest portfolio growth factor of 2021. So this business target came out of a completely social motivation. And no business plan would have ever found that, right?
Absolutely. I mean, in hindsight, it's like very logical,
right?
But that's with everything in life in hindsight.
Yes.
Now, picking up on your very concrete example, I can imagine when that board, when that company, when they brought you in, you were not the only ones pitching.
No, and the pitch did not go well.
Yeah, that's what I was guessing. And but you probably were the only ones who said, we honestly don't know, right? Let's figure out together. Let's do this together. I'm in that situation quite often.
I remember being taken to the side of the room by someone who wore a tie and said, look, 2 things. Number 1, do you have a tie? I said, I actually don't. Number 2, he said, look, we are just not sure about your methodology, about your project design.
Yeah.
And I couldn't think of anything better to say but saying, well, look, I'm just not sure about yours.
Which is true.
Yeah, I don't think you can plan and predict this. You're doing something completely new. Best case scenario, you're going to be successful and not learn anything, and you have some mediocre results. Is that really what you're aiming for here? And I guess that worked. He said, look, yeah, you're probably right. We have no idea where this is going to land, and we want to do genuinely doing something different. Nobody planned that this was the single largest growth driver of 2021 for the business.
Yeah. No one was expecting this either.
No, I mean, if you started out with a project saying we want to, gain X many new customers as a mid-sized financial institution, that would be preposterous. We've never had this sort of growth in 200 years. That was not even in the deck. Nobody foresaw that. But it's incredible that when you do something genuine with humility and you say, look, let's try it out, staff is more motivated, the team seems more authentic, and that authenticity is not just felt with your own team, but also with your existing and new customers.
Absolutely. I mean, if you talk to marketing departments, they always come and say authenticity with every single person in that organization, with the brand message that you send out, with every marketing campaign that you run is like key in order to succeed recruiting new customers. Now, going to that example. So you mentioned yourself, the pitch didn't go particularly well, at least like from a traditional perspective.
No, it did not.
But what I guess you managed to do is be very authentic yourself. And very honestly, like compared to most other organizations, tell them what the reality is, that not only they don't know what's going to be the initiatives that are going to work, but also you don't know. And that this uncertainty requires a certain approach. Because sometimes I see people like saying, okay, we just go to our customers and we tell them we don't know anything. Yeah, that's not going to work. So you can say, I don't know what's going to work, but I do have a systematic approach to figure out what's going to work, right? We're going to set up experiments in various areas, and we're going to constantly measure towards the outcomes that we want to achieve, like this local social cohesion and the better investment criteria for like sustainable and energy, etc. And then we will implement those learnings very quickly. And that's how our approach is going to look like. That's how we're going to ensure the discipline when we work with you. And probably that is the part of the message that landed well with your customer. Is that correct?
I'm not sure about this particular one. When I questioned their methodology, I think that was a breakthrough in the conversation. That seemed just more genuine on this particular assignment. But look, I'm still a German chartered accountant by training, so I'm not used to, go free and, do it all. There are areas which I am incredibly, my team as well around in various countries in the world, incredibly invested to control. And I mean control in a very conscious sense. We want to control the speed of learning. We want to control the metric dissemination, as we call it. It gets pretty techy there. We want to make sure that the project leaders have the authority and the obligation, in fact, to change internal budgets within a month. This cannot take a quarter. By quarter next year, the world has changed again. And we need to make sure that the sales manager is able to adjust what the customer wants in that meeting within a framework in which we can work and control risk. So it takes a certain knowledge of what can I control, what am I not negotiate on, metrics, leadership. You can actually control innovation in a certain degree where you say, I definitely want at least many data points every month. And if you don't get them, or if they look rubbish, then I have a different kind of call, with the project team. Say, look, guys, this isn't good enough. So that's where I'm very, very non-laissez-faire. I'm not saying that this is the way to go. I'm not the world's best manager, but far that would be an incredibly sad thought. But I think my team and I, we are pretty clear on the serenity prayer. Accept the things we can't change and measure the things we really can.
Yes. No, I get that. So that's also our approach when we work with clients, right? We tell them very straight up what we believe the right approach is, not necessarily what are going to be the concrete initiatives, but in terms of, okay, how are we going to set up the team? How are we going to decide on experiments? We need someone that is part of this team, as you mentioned, right? They can take decisions on the spot. We can't have like this team building reports and like 3 months later, you have some kind of steering committee that out of nowhere makes either a decision or postpones it to another 3 months. So that's not going to fly. So if we want to have that learning journey together, we need to set up the right environment so that learning can happen much, much faster than it has happened in the past.
Yeah, well, yes, and that it can be put to use. That is the ultimate crux here. It's like, it's great to know. It's even better to actually practice out, because that lesson you've just learned is probably not going to be the wisdom's end.
Yes.
Yeah. So can you try out what you think you know, and then tell me in 30, 60 days later, is that true, or is it slightly different yet again? I think the bottom part is here, the better you learn, the more authentic you are, the more success you'll have. And it doesn't get any more complicated than that, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. So you worked many years in this not-for-profit sector. And to my surprise, I always thought these not-for-profit organizations were like super bureaucratic. And I think to some extent that's true, but when the project teams can act very autonomously, or at least your project team could do that, that's probably like a good balance then to have like on the delivery side. Now, at some point you move, or you also start working into regular for-profit organizations. Now, for what kind of initiatives do these for-profit organizations primarily bring in you and your team?
I really don't want this to be a marketing exercise right now. So
no, that's not. It's not. It's more like to frame the context of like where we dive deep next in our interview.
Yeah. So I was interested into returning to corporates and company and leaders because, well, frankly, if we want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, if we want to, make the world better by, any of the 9 spheres of planetary boundaries, then it can't just be left to NGOs, which basically, or to the international government organization, which basically manage less than 0.05% of the nation's GDP. I mean, that is just not going to help. Likewise, more and more corporate connections and friends approached MzN, saying, look, we realize we want to be part of the solution. We realize we cannot really save or reduce ourselves out of the climate refugee radicalization crisis, and we also, that's one side. So we have, we realize that if we are sitting on the sidelines of a societal planetary problem, whether it's local or whether it's in a country or whether it's in your market or whether it's global, doesn't really matter. If we are sitting on the sideline, then our business is going to be sidelined. Over time. And this used to happen over 10 years, now happens over 2 years. And so there's a critical realization that that commercial organizations, companies, and I run one after all, are critically dependent on organizations to be innovative and to be authentic. And business as usual just won't help us, won't help the planet, and in all likelihood won't help our business either. So actually the assumption was, do your lessons from the field, I hate that word, but you know what I mean, from the development humanitarian field, is paired up with thinking around agility, which you know better than I do, comes from the tech sector originally. Does that inform a critical concept here? Because it prioritizes experimentation, learning, change, communal engagement, because our customers are not just the people with a credit card, they are our constituents. Mm-hmm. And when you frame it like that, it sounds a lot more natural. It sounds a lot a different conversation to have. Of course, it does mean we need to break some corporate structure. So we're working with one right now, for example, where the first thing we have to do is actually, let's get away from the quarterly profit reporting. We need to think a little bit more systematic here. Mm-hmm. That takes courage, and that is still done in a committee. So you can't just decide that. Yeah, you still have to dance with the system here. But turns out it's entirely possible to change. And that to me as well, so let me just say this, that to me is also the essence of leadership. It's to be a leader is a pretty privileged, but also, a dangerous situation. It should be dangerous. Compared to a manager, a leader is willing, she is willing, or he is willing to put their reputation and their time on the line and risk something that is truly transformative. If you just want a job, well, there are plenty out there.
Yeah, that's a good one, right? You ultimately have to risk your reputation. Otherwise, like, bigger change is not going to happen. And what we need is bigger change. Now, diving into this bigger change, last time we talked, there was one interesting area that you mentioned. So when we talked about sustainability, you told me, Sohrab, sustainability is not about less, it's about more, right? And I found that like, I was like, yeah. And when you gave examples, that resonated really with me. So let's start with this. Why, or what is your argument behind sustainability is not less, sustainability is more? Share this a bit with our audience, and then we can dive deeper on this and what kind of challenges this means for us as societies, and how we can approach those things with the collective experience that we have.
Right. Okay. It's a really good question. And again, there are many thinkers that are probably better informed than I am. There are people who are being paid to be in academic organizations to do nothing else but think about that. But here's my take, for better or worse. The fact is that we have 1 million unserved customers. We have, if you're an energy company, then the vast majority of the areas are non-electrified. If you're a mobile phone company, or you provide data transmission services, we have a huge amount of countries and locations and customers who are not served. We have a lot of people who live in poverty and need more. So a sustainable, more just and better world and a better business go hand in hand. We need to do more. We need to produce more energy. We need to produce more food, high quality food. We need to produce more medicine, more schooling. None of this is reduce and recycle. Obviously, we have to reuse. We have to move to a circular economy, but even that requires more change rather than nothing. Yes. What really just distracts me is this idea that we can just plant a few trees, switch the light off as we leave the room, and switch to an electric car and call that, oh well, there we are. We've done something. We have to do a little bit less. Well, maybe we have to cancel our second holiday this year. I want the customer, I want the holiday maker to go on the second holiday this year, but I want them to fly with a sustainable aviation fuel. And yes, they may be prepared to pay 100, 200 euros more for that. That is fine with the customer. That is fine with the airline. And if it's, actually sucks carbon out of the air, it's totally fine with the planet. So we cannot save or reduce ourselves out of this crisis. We have to reshape the economy, and we have to reshape our business, if we break it down, into the planetary boundaries. But that doesn't mean less. That means doing more radical things. We are critically dependent on innovation. That, again, to turn it to Euro, means the leaders have to be, fostering and driving innovation into uncharted waters. Or in other words, we will never reach the shores of. We would have never discovered America if we kept the ship in the harbor. Yes, that's the safest way to keep the ship.
Or just went out for fishing and coming back.
Yeah, we have to lose sight of the shore. If the captain's mission was to keep the ship safe, he would never venture out.
So the mission needs to be something else. In that case, right?
So we have to do more about transmission. And I think the fundamental realization is, and it's clear as day to anybody who looks at the news, if we as an organization, as leaders of our businesses, as leaders in our organizations, want to continue to thrive, continue to have a rightful place as leaders, and continue to inform the debate, continue to make the future, then will have to get involved in what the society needs and wants. We have to be in the center of the solution, not just reducing a little bit of harm.
Yeah. So now looking at this, right? Now, every organization, I think today, at least in like most developed countries, I don't even know if we can still use this term, but in like most industrialized or like companies that are also producing, unfortunately, a ton of CO2, every single leader, be it large organizations or smaller organizations, at some point needs to respond to this question: what are we doing about global warming? What are we doing about climate change?
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing from you is that the response is probably not going to be, oh, we just shut down our business, or we do less business, right? And the response is probably going to be our services, depending, of course, on the sector that you're in, are even like needed more, but we need to figure out how we deliver those services, right? How do we fly people around the world that want to go for a travel without emitting CO2? How do we educate more kids? How do we provide more food to all those people who are still hungry, right? Now, when we think about this, and you mentioned this, like these are uncharted waters, not only for that particular organization, but basically for all organizations. Because if we had the solutions, we would probably be already using them. I think there are some solutions that we have and are not being used at scale right now, but even the scaling of a solution and the scaling of a business model and the acceptance of that business model by customers, right? Be it either the willingness to pay more or like use the service in a different way, or like whatever, a lot of change is necessary. That all of those things are uncharted waters. Now, with your lessons and working in the not-for-profit sector, right? Where the value of like the team, or that where the teams were able to work very autonomously, I'm guessing that you try to bring a lot of those lessons back or into like regular corporations.
Right. Yeah.
And my question to you would be, what are the things that you observe where most organizations struggle with, right? They know they have to go on this change journey, but with which part of the change do they have the biggest challenge, the biggest problem?
So I'm not sure there's an answer for every organization deals with one, but let me try again by two examples from the recent, few months. One positive example is we're working with a company that builds kitchens right now, basically appliances in the household, very established brand. So, expansion and business plans, in the northern half of the planet, basically, Europe, a bit of Asia, but mostly North America and Europe. And shareholders were, not impressed. The market is saturated. Everyone has a toaster these days. Everybody has a thing. So where is the biggest growth market? And they just went on this, big, large management consultancy. What's our next step? Where can we divest? Should we go down to the supply chain? Shall we go horizontally into venture and other products? Until someone said, guys, just so you know, most people in Africa don't have ovens. And there was just silence in the boardroom. It's like there's a huge need for kitchen appliances that are not dependent on continuous energy supply, that are done cheaper. And it's currently only produced by a few Chinese suppliers. I mean, we're talking about millions. So what I loved about this is that got through. They framed a problem into a massive opportunity that addresses both a severe societal need as well as the biggest business opportunity that this business ever had. Oh, guess what? If we change our product, then we have a huge global market, 4 times the size of our current one. Forget fine-tuning the supply chain. That never, that is just not material. So that was a plan that was a realization that was pervasive in this organization. Where this organization then struggled massively is we need to change everything we do: our brand, our technology, our suppliers, how we engineer things, how we sell things, because we can't just put up a massive there are no malls to sell into. Our marketing of it, and the way we distribute.
The whole business model around it.
Everything has to change.
Yeah,
so totally. And that is a pretty daunting channel. And there was a big hold up for months at board level saying, shall we really do this? This is just too extreme. You know, it's not like this is a competitor free environment either. And eventually it got through and that can be daunting. And this is the answer to your question. If you look at these problems in their, in their total, it is just massive. You know, it's a bit like the personal change journey. If you want to build a house and you think of all the things you need to do, or if you want to lose, go on to change your diet and you need to lose 20 kilograms, that just seems too much. If you need to run, if you go from nothing on sitting a sofa and you want to run a 42 kilometers marathon, I mean, it's just overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
But if you break it down into its constituent parts, saying, right, okay, well, let's figure one thing out, first, let's not go for all sectors. Let's just go for this town. And then just go for one, solution. And let's just go for one local distributor. We can't deal with cash. Let's just try something via mobile phone transfer. Can we deal with the financial part of it? Do we need to register in all these countries, or can we go via partners? And if you just break it down into constituent parts, yes, it's still difficult, but it's actually entirely possible for most of the time.
Yeah.
It is very
one question at a time.
Yeah, it's if you're not going to run this marathon in 6 months. It may take you a year. All you can do is today we're buying trainers. Tomorrow we're putting them on for the first time, and the day after tomorrow we're running 100 meters. No more, no less. Yeah. So if you break it down as parts, then in my experience at least, if you are giving the project teams autonomy to solve a problem, it is very rare to come across one problem that would stop the entire project. Yes, you may, to use the analogy again, I'm not a runner, but within a month, you may be able to run 5K, but you're finding it really hard to keep the pace and run the additional 2K. Then you probably find a solution for that by saying, let's just run those additional 2K after half an hour break. And then here we are, you can do it. So that's what I mean. There's very rarely a single problem that stops the entire project. If you break it down,
if you break it down,
there are workarounds. None of them will be perfect at first.
Yeah. And I mean, each of those things, again, I mean, you mentioned all the areas that they would have to change, right? It's not only the product, it's the whole business model around it, like distribution, marketing, sales, like every cash management, all of those things. And in every one of those areas, you probably have sometimes more, sometimes less uncharted waters.
Right.
And the approach is to run small experiments and learn along the way. And as you mentioned, right, you break it down into like all sorts of smaller problems, and then you address them one by one. And I've had the same experience with like several clients. We have this like big question, like how are we going to develop this product instead of 5 years in 18 months?
Right.
And then all right, so let's look at every single piece of this, right? And can we, in theory, do it? And then you realize, okay, the traditional 5 years are there because we have so many areas where like decisions are not being taken, they take too long, and like we have bottlenecks at various points. So if we remove all of those things, you realize, okay, we can technically do it in 18 months, right? This is the first principle thinking that a lot of people also use. And then you're like, all right, so let's do this one by one, address these things.
Yeah, but my approach to this one, would be, let's not even plan it for 18 months. If as soon as a project manager needs to wait for 24 hours for permission, there's a bottleneck, trust them. Just do it. Just do it. You know your project best. Unless you need, 100% more budget, then yes, there is a financial control to that. But, we can probably get around that too.
Yeah.
I'm running my own team like this one. If I were to put a constraint around my project managers around the world, and some of the projects have nothing to do with the initial contract, If I were to go there saying, show me the project that is related to this contract, I don't think that half the projects would comply. What I'm taking comfort in is that I'm not even asked; they just do it, and that took a culture change. When they realized there is no bad consequence for me to go on a limb here. I can change this. I can work around this. I've got good reasons for this, and within a framework, of course, to not hurt the other constituents parts of it. But that may require a 3 to 6 months culture change in the team, and say, look, I know that bank, for example, I know we've always been about compliance and checklists, but guess what? Go for it and find a solution, and don't ask the board.
Don't ask the board. And actually the board backs you up. Right?
No, just, the board has given you a budget, has given you a timeline. All we want to see is we want to know in 3 months' time, where are we and what have we learned?
Let's run with this.
Yeah, and I think that requires a level of trust.
Absolutely.
Also trust in a maturity, and I can't foresee the future. I'm not this charismatic leader who can somehow see further than anybody else can. But if you convey that trust to your team, 90% of the team will begin to trust you back.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. Now, when we talked last time, another thing that, in addition to sustainability, sometimes also, or might mean we need more, not less. Another thing that stuck with me was when you mentioned that the balance sheet of organizations, the profit statement, right, needs to change. That we actually need, I think if I remember correct, like 3 things in there.
Right.
In addition to profits, we also need to know the impact on people and the impact on the planet. Do I remember that correctly?
Yeah, the 3P principle that
exactly. Can you walk us through this as like the final piece of this conversation? Because I really like that, and I like to learn more about it, and I believe it could be interesting for our audience as well.
Well, look, I'm a pretty socially motivated guy, primarily because I'm a father. So I appreciate that even though I'm a businessman and an advisor, I can come across as as sort of a eco warrior in a shirt. But there is another pretty clear business rationale here. If you accept that the times are changing massively, and if you accept that if your organization, your business, sitting at the sidelines of a societal problem or a planetary problem, is probably not going to scale massively, is probably not even going to stay stable, frankly. There will be some pandemic, some disaster that knocks it off course. That the best way that we can provide value for our shareholders is to provide value for our stakeholders. And our stakeholders are not just our shareholders, but they're also, the system we rely to, the air we breathe, i.e. the planet, and it's people, our staff, our customers, our suppliers, our community. And instead of just one line of, we're managing therefore by profit, and we're incentivizing by profit and profit share schemes and bonus schemes that are driven by profit, it's an incredibly motivating and incredibly growth fueling proposition to say, guess what? We will pay bonuses, but we'll pay them on 3 lines. A profit metric, yes, that's pretty easy. A planetary metric and a people metric.
Yeah.
And then you can build this by metrics. You can change them to your market, to your geographic area, to your thematic area. Clearly, one organization is not going to save the world, so you want to be very careful which ones you choose, and you can be a bit smart about that. And that is usually a first conversation. But just changing the way we incentivize our management and ourselves by saying it's not just going to be the profit, it's also going to be 3 other things. And that probably means you need to sacrifice some profit, because guess what? This is going to cost money this year. Then you build an incredibly stable team, an incredibly motivated organization, and some very loyal customers. And I'm sure you can appreciate that some stability in the team and some loyalty in the customer base goes a long way to build a sustainable business and, turns out a sustainable planet.
Yeah. So you mentioned the example of the bank that you're working with earlier, right? And what kind of business results, also profit results they achieve. Now, what I would be interested in particularly, also for myself, measuring profit, as you mentioned, it's easy, right? As a chartered accountant, like, I mean, even you don't even have to be a chartered accountant to measure the profit of an organization. But what would be, from your perspective, from your experience, good metrics with regards to people and good metrics with regards to the planet?
So that really depends on your business and the aims that you set yourself on. So first of all, imagine, I don't want to dive too geeky here. After all, I'm an accountant, but it took us about 150 years to define the word profit and to get an internationally, agreed, legally committing standard to what the word profit is. And even that, we haven't even reached it with the word equity. If you ask 5 accountants, what is equity? They all give you very different answers. So let's not pretend as if finance is always clear. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the first one. The second one is, if you are in a financial institution and you feel like your business has to do with the wealth divide, and you decide, I want to do something about this, and I guess my business proposition is shaped around that as well, then there are smart metrics we can take. There are a bunch of pretty clear and quantitative and even automized metrics you can do to measure social outcomes. And guess what? The people I work with for the last 15 years, the NGOs, they've done nothing else but that. Go and ask Oxfam, how do you measure social cohesion? And they'll give you a pretty good answer. It's actually pretty measurable to a large degree, at least. Thing with carbon accounting is pretty straightforward. How much carbon are you putting out? If you're in the manufacturing or processing business, well, how much carbon are we putting out? Is carbon the thing to measure even? First important question. There's even databases, and we are using a few of them, where we can provide this in semi-real time. We can probably give you, 50% of the planetary and people impact of your organization on the people and the planet within about a day. That's far more than people expect normally. So, for example, to make it more practical again, working with a clothing brand here in Germany right now. And they have a hugely complex supply chain, but they're using in vast majority of the product cotton. While we know most cotton, where it comes from from East Africa. Most cotton in the world comes from East Africa or from Southeast Asia, and therefore we know, on average, there's this many child labor, this much slave bonded labor in the supply chain by average, and there's this much transport costs and transport carbon. So no, this is not going to be perfect, but with an 80% likelihood, this is the metrics we're looking at. And then you can work more detailed, go and visit and improve on that metric. But it's not a wild guess all. It's not like there's nothing out there. We have the first emerging databases that are even digitally run where we can pull these metrics off. And if anybody asks, there's a chance that I can probably provide you with a fair set of metrics with a 50 to 80% accuracy rate within a week. So it's not
good enough,
which is a good starting point.
Yeah.
And from there, you can see what societal impact you're having. And that's where likely, and this is, I guess, my main point here, this is where likely your biggest business opportunity is coming from as well, in that societal planetary impact you're having there. If you're spotting the next opportunity in that range, it's very likely to be very material.
Yeah. So profits, people, and planet as one way, or as like 3 ways to measure the success of an organization.
Right.
Christian, I really enjoyed this conversation with you.
So did I. Thank you.
The advancement of time. I think this is not going to be our last conversation because there are a few more topics that I want to address with you. And maybe next time we can do this face to face.
That'd be lovely. I'm in Hamburg.
Nice coffee.
You're in Cologne. Let's do this over coffee. I function a lot better over coffee.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. All right.
Are there any urgent questions, or can we log it off here?
We can log it off here. We can log it off.
Well, so, right. Helen, thank you very much for organizing this talk. It's been really nice. Thank you very much. And I'll hopefully see you in person soon. And to everybody listening, have a very Merry Christmas.
Yes, same from me. Christian, thank you.
Cheers for now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.